Now, so we're going to look at who this Antichrist is in this next slide. So we're going to be analysing the Antichrist of Daniel 7, and he'll be the little horn. So Daniel 7 verse 24, and it says, "And the 10 horns out of this kingdom are 10 kings that shall arise, and another shall arise after them." So the 10 horns, which is the clay, the 10 kings, or because kings rule over kingdoms, 10 horns are from the Roman Empire, and this will be the countries, which is the clay, as well as the horns, as well as the Romans, is basically the countries that they used to rule over back in ancient times. So we're just going to look at the map here. So we have an eastern side of the map and a western side of the map, and so if you can almost imagine horns being scattered all over this map, in a sense symbolic of these kingdoms from the beast of Rome. And Antichrist will come from one of these countries. He'll either come from the western side or he'll come from the eastern side. So that will give us a good visual idea of where he will come from. Next slide. So let's look at the Antichrist narrative of Daniel 7, of what we're going to learn about his characteristics and what he does. And it says here, Daniel 7, verse 20, "And of the 10 horns that were in his head, and of the other which came up, and before whom 3 fell, even of that horn that had eyes and a mouth that spake very great things." So we learned that the little horn is the Antichrist, and we're learning that he has a mouth speaking great things. Next slide. Verse 21, "I beheld, and the same horn made war with the saints." So this will be the left behind and those that are saved during the tribulation, "and prevailed against them." So what we find here is that the Antichrist is at war against the saints, and he prevails against them. Verse 25, "And he shall speak great words against the Most High." So the Antichrist speaks against God with great words, so he's a blasphemer. Next slide. We're going to look at now is how long does the Antichrist war against the saints? Verse 25, "And shall wear out," so this is the Antichrist, "wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws, and they shall be given into his hand until a time, end times, and the dividing of time." Now when we look at Jonathan Cahn, who was a Jewish Messianic rabbi, he explains what that actually means. He says it means that it's a time and times, and the dividing of time is 3.5 years. So a time is 1 year, times is 2 years, and a half would be half a year. That's how he explains that. Verse 26, "But the judgment shall sit, and they, the saints, shall take away the Antichrist's dominion, to consume and to destroy it unto the end." So after the 3.5 years, through God, the saints eventually take over the Antichrist's kingdom. So that's what will eventually happen. Next slide, thanks. So verse 27, and it says here, "And the kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdom under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High, whose kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions, which is kingdoms of the earth, shall serve and obey him." So eventually the kingdoms around the world are just going to basically have to serve God, eventually. So all dominions will eventually serve God and obey him. Verse 9, and it says here, "I beheld till the thrones were cast down, and the Ancient of Days did sit, whose garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head like the pure wool. His throne was like the fiery flame, and his wheels as burning fire." Verse 10, "And a fiery stream issued and came forth from before him. Thousands ministered unto him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The judgment was set, and the books were opened." So eventually we find is that God brings his kingdom to the earth after the Antichrist situation, and then the books are opened for God to judge. Now what we're going to do is we're going to look at the narrative of the Antichrist in Daniel 11. This goes into a lot of details here. And this is to do with an unnamed kingdom of the north. So none of the scholars know where this kingdom actually is, but we're going to find out what the Antichrist will be doing in this kingdom, wherever it is. So Daniel 11 verse 20, and it says here, Then shall stand up in his, a king of the north, estate, a raiser of taxes in the glory of the kingdom. But within few days he shall be destroyed, neither in anger nor in battle. So what we find here is that a king of the north is being destroyed in some way, and the Antichrist will be the next person to take his position, as we're going to be reading in verse 21. And it says here, and in his estate shall stand up a vile person. So this is someone that's being despised here when you look at the translation. So this is the Antichrist, to whom they shall not give the honor of the kingdom, but he shall come in peaceably and obtain the kingdom by flatteries. So he's using a form of intrigue when you look in the translation of that. So what we find here is that the people in this kingdom, they despise the Antichrist. They do not want to give him this kingdom. And the Antichrist has a trick up his sleeve, and he starts to use intrigue and peace to take over this kingdom. Next slide. And it says here in verse 23, and after the league made with him, he shall work deceitfully, for he shall come up and shall become strong with a small people. So we find his characteristics is that he's deceptive in this kingdom of the north. And in verse 24, it says here, he shall enter peaceably even upon the fattest places of the province. So he's using peace as a tool to deceive rich people and to take authority over this province in this kingdom of the north. Verse 25. And he shall stir up his power and his courage against the king of the south with a great army. So again, we learn that the Antichrist has a great army, so he's a man of war as well. Verse 29. And at the time appointed he shall return and come toward the south, but it shall not be as the former or as the latter. For the ships of Chittim, or Cyprus, it's actually Cyprus, shall come against him. Therefore he shall be grieved and return. So what we find here is that the Antichrist actually loses a war to the Cyprus military. This is actually going to be very important for our next talk. And what we find here is that the Antichrist becomes grieved because of this loss. So it's obviously very serious. So these things take place before he secures his overall dominion on the earth. So this is what we can start to look for. And it says here, in verse 30, and return and have indignation against the holy covenant. So shall he do, he shall even return and have intelligence with them that forsake the holy covenant. So he's going against God. So what we find is that the Antichrist is against the holy covenant. There are other people who also forsake the holy covenant. And they're definitely not pagans. They have to be believers in God, falling away from the faith in 2 Thessalonians 2. Because to forsake means you have to be doing the holy covenant in this first place, but they're forsaking it, so they're going away from God instead. So what we find here is in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, it says here, this is Paul, in verse 3, let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come, except there come a falling away first, and that man of sin, the Antichrist, be revealed, the son of perdition, who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God, in the temple of God. So the context of this verse is that the believers are deceived to fall away from God, so they're forsaking the Holy Covenant, and the Antichrist is being revealed in this third temple of God. Next slide. Now we're going to read Daniel 11, verse 31. And arms shall stand on his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, and shall take away the daily sacrifice. And they shall place the abomination that maketh desolate. So this could be an idol to be worshipped, but none of the scholars can completely precisely know what the abomination of desolation is. So it could be the image of the beast mentioned in Revelation 13. So this will be in the context where they're in Jerusalem and they're doing the daily sacrifice, taking it away and putting something else in place. So he takes away the daily sacrifice, he places the abomination and makes desolation in Jerusalem, and this will have to mark the war on the saints, the great tribulation of the saints. And it says here, verse 32, and such as do wickedly against the covenant shall he cut by flatteries. But the people that do know their God shall be strong and do exploits. And they that understand among the people shall instruct many, yet they shall fall by the sword, and by flame, by captivity, and by spoil many days. So this has to be talking about the Great Tribulation, because in Luke 21, verse 24, you have the same language being mentioned there. It says, and they, which is the saints, shall fall by the edge of the sword, and shall be led away captive into all nations. So you can definitely see some parallels there. So these are the saints that believe in God. They are falling by the sword, perishing by flame, and being taken into captivity. And this is the war on the saints. Verse 36, and the king shall do according to his will, and he shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods. So what we find here is that the Antichrist speaks great words against the Most High, which is blasphemy. He even believes he is God, he is even above all gods. And this, of course, is told in 2 Thessalonians 2, where the Antichrist is in the third temple of God, calling himself God. This has to be happening while there is war on the saints, those that were left behind from the rapture. The war lasts for 3.5 years, as we just learned. And it says here, neither shall he regard the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any god, for he shall magnify himself above all. So what I find here is that he doesn't actually desire women, and we know that in ancient times, typical kings like King Solomon or King David, they would always have many, many wives. But the Antichrist, I find it interesting, the Antichrist is actually very unique here. Especially when he's having world dominion, he can have anything he wants. But the Antichrist, it's almost like as if no one's worthy of him. It's the only way I can make sense of this. Like maybe believes that he's too good for everybody. Like he's untouchable or something like that, maybe. Could be something like that. So what we're going to do now is we're going to look at to see how the Antichrist is defeated and comes to his end next. So this is him coming to his end eventually. Verse 45, and it says here, and he shall plant the tabernacles of his palace between the seas in the glorious holy mountain. Yet he shall come to his end, and none shall help him. So this, of course, is the death of the Antichrist. This has to be roughly when the 3.5 years is finished, and God's kingdom is coming to the earth. He comes to the earth. Antichrist comes to his end, and we can read about this in 2 Thessalonians 2, verse 8. And it says here, then shall that wicked, the Antichrist, be revealed, whom the Lord shall consume with the spirit of his mouth, and shall destroy with the brightness of his coming. So what we find here is that the Antichrist, we're learning here, is going to the holy mountain of God to face God. So he's at war with God, but God destroys him with the spirit of his mouth and the brightness of his coming. And this is God's glory coming to destroy the Antichrist. Now we can actually read about Jesus in Revelations 19, verse 11. And I saw heaven opened, and behold, a white horse, and he that sat upon him was called Faithful and True. So this is Jesus coming down. And in righteousness he doth judge and make war. His eyes were as a flame of fire, and out of his mouth goeth a sharp sword, that with it he should smite the nations. So this is basically Jesus coming to rule and reign on the earth for 1,000 years with his millennial kingdom after when he destroys the Antichrist. What we're going to look into next is Daniel 12, which I'm pretty convinced is continuing from Daniel 11, and I'm going to